In this video, I will show how to solve a quadratic equation by completing the square. And first, let me remind you the method of solving a quadratic equation by completing the square. First, we complete the square. Then, if perfect square is not isolated, we isolate the square. And then after that, we use the square root property. Now let me remind you what the square root property is. It says that if you have something squared equals to a non-negative number, then whatever you have squared is either positive or negative square root of that non-negative number. And plus or minus is just an abbreviation for saying that something is positive square root or that something can be a negative square root. So let's solve this equation by completing the square. Also, let's recall that to complete the square, we have to have an expression that looks like this, and we complete the square by adding half of b squared, and then it becomes x plus half of b squared. And if the sign in front of the x is negative, then that negative just becomes the subtraction inside of the parentheses. And so to complete the square, we have to first isolate x squared plus bx term. And to do that, we're going to add 9 to both sides. Now, what we see is that the leading coefficient of x squared is not equal to 1, so I cannot complete the square yet. To complete the square, the expression must have leading coefficient equal to 1. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3. Now we see that the left-hand side contains an expression that looks exactly like the one that we can complete the square of. So we complete the square of this expression by adding half of 2 squared. Well, half of 2 squared is just 1, and keep in mind that we have to add 1 to both sides of this equation. So I'm also going to put plus 1 on the right side. Now the left hand side of this equation becomes perfect square of x minus 1, and the right hand side is simply 4. So now the square is isolated, so we can just use the square root property. And to use the square root property here, we say that what was squared is equal to plus or minus square root of 4, which is plus or minus 2. And we interpret it as x minus 1 is 2, or x minus 1 can be negative 2. So adding 1 to both sides gives us 3 over here, and adding 1 to both sides gives us negative 1 over here. And therefore, the two solutions of the original quadratic equation are negative 1 and 3.